Hello and welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. I'm your host, Kevin Castley. Thank you for tuning in today. So, this is something that I wanted to make a video on for a while now. And this is a common misconception that exists in the political discourse, in which anyone who is hawkish, anyone who has any degree of pilledness with respect to foreign policy, national security, the military, and interventionism at large, is labeled a neoconservative. Case in point, John Bolton. John Bolton is often described as a neocon. You'll hear the likes of Kremlin Kyle Kulinski of Secular Talk. He will refer to John Bolton as a quote-unquote neocon ghoul. You know, that's actually from where my Twitter name is derived, neocon ghoul. You know, it's a big meme. But the thing is, John Bolton is not a neocon. Unlike me, he's not actually a neocon. Now, I like John Bolton a lot. I think he's based. I mean, that's self-evident. Look at his career. Look at his entire track record. Ever since he was 15, he's been based in Hawkbill. But here's the thing. He's not a neoconservative. Now, what does that even mean when I say that? Because labels don't even really have any sort of meaning anymore. Well, you know, neoconservatism is a sort of specific persuasion with respect to foreign policy and society at large. But when we're talking about foreign policy specifically, as in the case of John Bolton, you know, you could say, well, on the domestic front, he's obviously quite conservative and everything. But as far as foreign policy goes, well, he's hawkish, so therefore he's a neocon. Not exactly, not exactly. Because one of the key elements of neoconservatism is the idea that human rights are universal, that democracy, liberal democracy, is the best system. Not, oh, you know, maybe some Westerners like it, but maybe it's not good for like brown people. Maybe they should have like despots and dictators and stuff, bro. No. It's a moral universalist proclamation that states that liberal democracy is a universal good and the universal best. And it is centered around American exceptionalism as the vanguard of liberty and the spearhead of the liberal order. Additionally, there is a point there that the United States, even if unilaterally, must go about propagating the expansion of democracy. And that often involves the process of nation building in order to topple the enemies of freedom and establish democratic states that have, you know, autonomy, agency for their people. There's also a desire to counter any sort of rivals, to combat communism anywhere in the world, a rejection of this idea of spheres of influence that you'll see posited by defensive realists, for example. Instead, the idea that America should not only have the biggest sphere of influence, but that the world is America's sphere of influence and must be solidified and consolidated as such. John Bolton is not a neoconservative. He's an offensive realist. Now, you can be both. I identify as a liberal neocon with offensive realist characteristics. John Bolton, on the other hand, does not. John Bolton is simply an offensive realist. Offensive realism is concerned with the prevention of a rival. It's concerned with doing anything, including preemptive war, necessary to secure the interests of the state from rivals and potential adversaries. It's as simple as that. There's no, what would you say? There's no normative call to expand democracy. There's no desire necessarily to propagate human rights throughout the world. It's simply concerned with maintaining the security and expanding the interests of the state which you're representing, in this case, the United States of America. Now, John Bolton obviously would regard America as exceptional still, but he said in the past, literally, that he does not believe that it's the job of the United States to spread democracy throughout the world. So on that alone, he's not a neocon. He's simply not. He doesn't come from that school of thought. He rather is more of just simply an offensive realist. Now, when it comes to offensive realism, he's very based, and he goes further than a lot of other people will. And people will describe realism as somewhat hawkish. It's not. Most realists I know are spheres of influence losers that talk about how, oh, well, you can see why Russia invaded Ukraine, right? Because like that's their sphere of influence, bro. And like you understand why like North Korea is scared, right? Because like they're worried about America having nukes, so they need nukes. Whereas John Bolton's like, I don't give a damn if they're scared. They should be scared. America's the best, and we're coming for them. That's John Bolton's attitude, and he's been based and hawk-pilled on North Korea before a lot of people even knew what North Korea was. And and the actual outcomes of what he would do versus what a neocon would do are similar. A neocon would topple the Kim regime. John Bolton would topple the Kim regime. Neocons are more specifically focused on nation building and establishing a democracy, whereas an offensive realist would, for example, be okay with setting up a puppet dictator, for example. But I've even said in the past that some of these more entrenched authoritarian societies will need to be in a transition period until democracy can actually be sustainable. In other words, you can't go from what they have right now to a democracy overnight. It's going to take some time to deprogram the population and everything. And in that intermediary period, you would essentially need a transitionary administration that would operate as an American puppet, basically. But with John Bolton, the goal at hand is primarily the removal of the threat, and what happens afterwards is a topic for another day. Whereas with the neocon, the goal from the get-go is to essentially do a liberation campaign, set up a democratic order, and of course, part of that is this idea of the democratic peace theory that Kant talked about, the idea that democracies don't tend to go to war with each other because people don't like war and whatnot. Whereas again, with John Bolton and with offensive realism at large, that in and of itself doesn't really necessarily make a normative aim. So, for example, there are offensive realists that work for the Kremlin, right? I mean, you could actually regard Sergei Lavrov as an offensive realist, for example. You regard Putin as an offensive realist, and you can regard John Bolton as an offensive realist. Now, the outcomes of what John Bolton would do and what neocons would do are similar. So, in that sense, you could say it's a degree of nuance that doesn't necessarily matter. I would say it does matter, but you could also talk about how, well, if the Russians get their way, then the outcomes of that are completely antithetical to what neocons want. So offensive realism and neoconservatism are two different things. There's a lot of overlap, and there can be more overlap in some areas than with other areas, and with some figures than with other figures, especially it depends what country they're working for, right? There are no Russian neocons, for example. There might be people that were born in Russia that become neocons. They move to the United States or the West. There's nobody who works for the Kremlin that's a neocon. The Kremlin is not concerned with spreading democracy throughout the world. It's as simple as that. So just to clear things up, bombing people doesn't make you a neocon. Supporting bombing people doesn't make you a neocon. John Bolton's not a neocon, but he's still based, and we still love him. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, everybody, and stay based.